as well as innovative scale-ups like Guild Group, Blue Apron, and Diapers. Um, as a former partner of that store, which is Carrefour's 80 million future of e-commerce investment vehicle, Olivia has been at the forefront of driving growth and innovation within the retail space. Her career has been dedicated to scaling businesses, merging the best of retail technology, and most recently leading B2B retail tech ventures and a retail media tech business. She embodies a full 360-degree approach to retail, deeply understand deeply understanding both sides of the P&L and technology trends that have the power to transform the industry. Basically, what we're going to do now is to have a 35-minute fireside chat, as always, and then our members will jump in. I just like also before we begin to take a moment to acknowledge and thanks our sponsors, Air Meat, for making this event happen. So, Olivia, welcome, and I'm thrilled to have you here. So I always start with the big picture. That's the that's the standard question. So how did we get here? Who's Olivia? Why France? An American in France? What's the story?
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And I think before that, I'm in Paris. And last night, because there are a bunch of Brazilians in this group, I watched the Brazilian women's beach volleyball team win. And it was quite the amazing atmosphere in Paris last night. So I
Nice.
think Brazil was represented well. So why am I here and how did I get here? I think actually to take a step back, my dad is a retired tech entrepreneur. So my first jobs ever were in and around technology, QA testing software for summer jobs, understanding sort of how startups had the power to transform traditional industries. My personal interest was more on the retail side of things. You know, I grew up with Vogue magazine and everything else, and enjoyed shopping and the luxury categories and the fashion retail categories, and decided to make my career really at the intersection of those two things, both the technology that drives change and transformation, as well as the traditional sort of P&L responsibilities of merchandising, inventory planning, and management. I moved to France 5 years ago now, really to get a more global perspective. I had spent most of my career in the US, but have dual nationality with the UK, and had the opportunity to work for a retail tech company headquartered in France, but with global offices. And it seemed like a great way to take the next step in my career and really globalize what I was doing and see a different perspective for retail. I think the US is a very consumerist culture. And so what does consumerism look like elsewhere, and what are the trends in retail that we see here today?
Amazing. And so, taking that as a segue for our next question. So, the Americans are, or North Americans are, like consumers at
Yeah.
a society that consumes, right? And what do you see in terms of difference, cultural differences as well for you, like as a North American to land into a Latin culture?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in Denmark for a while now. I think things are so slow in a way. Europe so consolidated, right? Compared to Brazil or the US, younger cultures in a way. So, what do you see? How do you see for you as an American? The
Yeah,
challenge.
totally.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, I think every country is so different. Like in the UK, I very much see like a very similar shopping culture and consumer culture as the US. But in France, some of the big things I noticed, e-commerce shopping, not nearly as strong here. Strong focus on luxury. I think with the luxury markets as they are, you actually need to go slow and make sure you don't break things, because the brand equity you have is so critically important. And I think that's a lot of the French ethos that I see is instead of move fast, break things, and then fix it later, it's very much, hey, we have a strong history, we have strong brand equity. Let's maintain what we have and maybe move a little bit slower, but make sure we don't break anything. I think just personally, I have found I went from shopping on Amazon, multiple times a day to now almost never shopping on Amazon. there's some legislative reasons you can't get everything free shipping here. It's protectionist towards booksellers in France, local booksellers, as well as I have a bunch of amazing specialized stores downstairs from my apartment where I know the shopkeepers, and it's my chance to practice French every day.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was in Paris, I think 2 years ago, just shortly after the pandemic. And I mean, the butcher store, is that correct in English? It's amazing. Like how they, how they lay the meat. I have
Yeah,
never seen that in, not even in Brazil. Like, it's beautiful just
I
to
totally
walk.
agree. It actually makes raw meat look gorgeous.
Yeah,
Yeah,
pastries as well. Like
yeah,
in Denmark, they have amazing pastry, but the way they just lay out the pastries and the butcher store. So it's actually an experience, right, in itself.
yeah. I'm totally with you on that. No, it's every moment is elevated into a special moment, even the really simple things. And it's funny, I think the things that make life really beautiful, so, beautiful experiences, food, drink, are very accessible here and really elevated. Even just going down to my local cafe, I've never been rushed out of it. It's about
Mhm,
sitting there, enjoying my tiny €3 coffee for as long as I want and enjoying
mhm.
the experience. So it's really this next level of experiential, economy versus just a purchase economy.
Where did you come from in the US?
I was in New York.
New
So
York, which is,
and yeah,
yeah.
20 exactly, the opposite.
Mhm,
Everything moves super fast, it's all about efficiency. I will say when I first moved to France, it used to drive me nuts how slow the checkout lines went. Everyone's having a chat, and now I
mhm,
totally embrace it. I go in, I'm like, "Okay, when I get to the front of the line, I can ask all my questions.
mhm,
I can ask the person who's checking me out whether they recommend this product or that product." And it's funny. I think in America we think of customer service as efficiency, and in France it's about expertise and advice.
mhm. And how do you see that? Because I think that's a great topic also to discuss. Like, you've been in commerce and playing around commerce for such a long time, and we see like this rise of live commerce or concierge technology, and I think there's so much to be done there in terms of, people look for experts rather than order takers, or right. So what's your views on those things? And we'll
Yeah.
speak about Carrefour as well, but
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, definitely live commerce and concierge and more of a curated experience is
mhm,
important right now. I think ultimately where it's going to go though is we have so much data, we have so much ability to personalize, especially with generative AI. And so I actually think we're going to move away from humans even more, but
mhm,
have more personalized sort of concierge-based services, but with AI agents. Now, I think it's a ways until we can get that fluidity that we need to trust people. But I'm thinking there's a company out of the UK called NM, and they do synthetic humans for a customer service use case. Their technology is not there to yet to be seamless with real humans, but it's only a matter of time.
Olivia, you've been. I mean, I'm looking. I have to look at your LinkedIn. I typically do this when we are doing the sessions, right? And the experience, like Gap. Have you met Elise, our American Edilsa Bueno? She's also former Gap
No.
uh, head of corporate strategy at Amazon. She was there. I'll introduce you guys. She's amazing. But I mean, Gap, and then Guild Group, and then Quidisi. I mean,
Quincy was we
tell,
were acquired by Amazon. Yeah.
yeah, tell, walk me through your experiences in retail. What were they like? I mean, you've been also working for a vendor, most recently a photography vendor,
Yeah.
Okus, right?
Yeah,
So yeah.
I've tried to I think there are specialists and then there are generalists, and I very much fall in that generalist category of always wanting to expand my depth of knowledge in new categories. And
Mhm,
so retail has been my North Star, but I've gone from, a brand where we were manufacturing our own clothes to a multi-brand retailer to direct to consumer and then moved over to B2B, where it was SaaS, photography operations, and
Hmm.
then most recently retail technology. So for me, it's about really understanding all the pieces. I always think in retail, you have so many levers to pull to drive results, and not there's no single lever that does it all. You
Hmm.
can increase prices and add promotions. You can decrease prices, but then you need to build your brand equity elsewhere. You can buy more inventory, you can buy less inventory. Each of these things have counterbalances. And I think, I was at Gap in a time when it was very, very heavily promotional. And we lost a lot of brand equity at that point. And it's if you think about promotions, yes, they drove top line revenue,
Hmm.
but at the end of the day, they didn't benefit the total company, or the health of the business. And I think that was always sort of what drove my career choices, is making sure I understood all the different levers in a deep enough way that I could make fully informed decisions.
Hmm. And you were working for what's so that store is a, you call it a vehicle, part
Yeah.
of Carrefour, right? Probably looking at interesting companies
Yeah.
to invest in and try it, and Carrefour test it, and then eventually spin off. What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was fascinating. So to precise that a little bit, we were so Dastor is one of the vehicles within Daphne, which is an early stage VC. And so what was unique about Dastor is we had a single LP who was Carrefour, which meant that we were really closely tied, or are, I just no longer work there, really closely tied to the Carrefour innovation team. So while we didn't have to invest in technology that Carrefour was going to use, we were able to work closely with Carrefour to understand what their problems were, what challenges they faced, what opportunities, and then look for technology that could support that. It was fascinating experience because the breadth of information you get as an investor. We were, reviewing 100 plus deals a week. So retail technology companies that wanted funding from us. And it was just the breadth of what we saw was incredible, and the creativity. Now, I think one of the challenges very much with innovation within large corporates is how do you kind of bridge that gap between a very small, cool new technology and the stability a large brand or retailer needs. And I think
Hmm.
that was something that we saw a lot there. I think Pepsi stands out to me as a company that's been really good at coming up with a pathway for innovation, and sort of having that flexibility of testing businesses that are probably too small to roll out fully, but are probably the future of where retail tech is going.
Hmm. But you're still sitting as an investor in some of these companies, or you had to sell your participation? No, because you.
Yeah, so Dastor remains an investor in these companies.
Mhm.
I'm involved in most of them as sort of advisor, or you know an ongoing relationship with them. But Dastor is the investor in it.
And Olivia, I'm interested in understanding a bit of this world as in as an investor.
Yeah,
What do you guys look for in terms of technology, in terms of quality of entrepreneurs as well?
yeah.
How are you making those decisions to say, okay, this is the right timing? These entrepreneurs, they have quality, they've proven whatever you look for. So tell me a bit about that journey.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. I think it really depends on what stage of business. So we were investing pre-seed to Series A, so very, very early stage. And I think the critical things at that point are, especially when you're pre-revenue, is what's this founding team like? Do they have a burning desire to do something? Or have they taken just a very intellectual approach to a problem and are trying to solve like a small edge case? And I think you see a really big difference between those two types of entrepreneurs, the ones who, are being kept up at night because they need to solve supply chain distribution or whatever the problem may be. So for me, it's about the drive and motivation. Also, at that point, it's mostly about the team. So the tenacity. How does this team deal with failure? Building startups is hard. I've done the path from zero to 10 a bunch of times, and it there's not a straight line. So the business you're building today is likely not the business you're building tomorrow. So you want to find teams that have that tenacity, but also have ability to deal with ambiguity. And then ultimately, is the problem big enough? And I think that's another thing. There are a lot, adding new technology to a large retailer requires a lot of change management. And if the benefit is incremental, the change management might not be worth it. So the benefit has to be big enough or dramatic enough that you can truly transform the way a company is working.
Yeah, but I think that's very interesting because if you're going to create let's say that the next Uber, which it's not an incremental
Yeah.
change. I mean, how do you provoke that change also? And I think from a cultural perspective, I think the French are way more conservative than Americans, aren't they? So,
Potentially, yeah. You know, it's one of the big things I've found that's been really fascinating investing across Europe, Israel, and the US, is almost even more the starting market. So I've actually found in the Nordics some of the most innovative companies, and Israel as well, because the home market size is so small, they think global from day one.
mhm.
And I feel like that global vision is so critical. If you go in to start a business and say, let me first start with my, $60 million, 60 million person country, win that market, and then 3 years later, win the next market, and 3 years later, win the next market, you can do it, but likely someone's going to come and win on a global level before you execute.
Yeah. I mean, our group, like the Evolve Commerce Club,
Yeah.
just running a group on WhatsApp, it's a social experiment, I tell you, because Brazilians, we use WhatsApp way more than people in Europe. And we had a guy, I really like him, the other day saying, "Hey guys, instead of commenting every time someone joins in the group, how about you should give a thumbs up to avoid the cluttering of messages and so on." So culture plays a massive difference, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And sort of like the stakes. It's interesting. I think moving to France, I assume because we have such a strong safety net here, that people would be more willing to take risks. Whereas in the US, we have no safety net. You mess up a business and there's nothing there protecting you. But in some ways, I almost think the drive, because the failure in the US is so absolute, or the potential for failure is so absolute, the drive seems higher. Um, Whereas I would have sort of coming into this international experiment, I assume the opposite would be true, that when you have this sort of a safety net, you could be bolder and do bigger things.
Olivia, when I started the Evolve Commerce Club, I had a thesis, which or a hypothesis was like, well, I'm getting older, 39. I'm gonna turn 40 next year, so getting gray hair and all. And the hypothesis is like there's a lot of senior people who are getting potentially bored with whatever they're doing, or they're gonna be sacked, but they're amazing talent, right? That was the hypothesis out there, to create a group of like an incredible pool of talent. So if I'm a company like Carrefour or a conglomerate that has the funds to innovate, I was thinking maybe I can have an incredible group with senior talent that it's like having the Real Madrid. For example, we have Ben in the call here, who's been at Capri Holdings and amazing experience recruiting talent. So his network is amazing.
Yeah.
We have Flavio in Brazil, who's now an advisor, former president of Walmart.com. So that was my idea initially, and it's still there. As you said, it's other things are happening. But how do you see the future of companies? Because I think well, there's always consolidation, in retail and across many sectors, but we're living longer,
Yeah.
and I think talent like yourself and Flavio, they're going to be available for fractional roles or advisory roles. So I'm interested in taking our conversation, uh, on that journey and understand, maybe pick your brain in that
Yeah.
sense.
Definitely. No, I think you're totally right about these fractional roles. It's definitely a trend I'm seeing across most of my network in the US is once you've sort of had those C-level positions, once you've checked those boxes, now it's more exciting to be inspired by a bunch of different folks rather than dedicating 100% of your time to one company. So I see a lot of the folks I used to work with, fractional CMOs helping, you know, I always think there's so many cool scale ups, so many cool businesses that are doing great things, but you have founders who haven't sort of watched the TV show before. And
Hmm.
so how can you as someone more experienced go in and help them make the right decisions faster or help avoid mistakes? So I totally agree with that. I'm seeing it definitely very strongly. I'm not sure I see it quite as much as in France as I do in the US.
Hmm.
What about, where you are? Are you seeing that either
Yeah, well, it
way?
depends, because here again, I think it goes back to the safety net, like the Nordics. It's Denmark. Um, uh, Denmark. The other day, I saw some stats, and it said that there's never been such a high employment rate as they have now. So they are hiring quite a bit here for fixed term contracts. But I think in the US, that's true. Brazil as well. I mean, we have very senior talent from Brazil in this community, that are looking at, they're seeing that they're taking advantage of this community and finding fractional roles. So I think in larger markets, that's probably right. So yeah, but
Yeah,
in markets like Scandinavia, that is very stable in a way, very wealthy. I'm not sure.
you don't need it as much. No, that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. I think that's the other one of the other things I see in the French startup scene is salaries are relatively low.
Hmm.
Much lower, I would say, than in the US. So most of these startups aren't going to afford someone with a lot of experience. But if they
Hmm.
still want to get some of that expertise, they have to find it a different way. And maybe it's one day a week, maybe it's an advisor position. That's one of the things I do a lot of is advise earlier stage startups in exchange for equity or in exchange for dollars. And that's much easier for earlier stage businesses to sort of stomach.
You mentioned some of the common errors, mistakes, that founders that haven't been so tested yet make. So what are these mistakes that you see in the with the founders that you advise today?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, with startups, it's about getting product out and testing and learning. I
Mhm.
think nothing's going to be perfect. Make sure it's good enough, but get it out there and see what your customers are saying. And I think I was at Amazon. We're so customer centric there. Diapers.com was the same. It was start with the customer, work backwards. And I think that's, when you're building in a bubble, especially when you're early stage, especially when you can build something that maybe the market doesn't need. And so starting with the customer, getting product out, and then iterating, I think is absolutely critical.
Very cool, and I agree. I mean, building this community. I think the community is a business. Also, we'll speak about that. We've been learning so much, with what people actually value and what we thought people would value. So it's really interesting, what is happening in the community, guys. I'd like to ask you to shoot your questions. You're very welcome, as always, to join us. Perhaps you'd like to raise your hands, and I'll invite you on stage. Ben, if you're available, would you like to ask anything? Or Sabrina? Yes, Sabrina, you join us. I'll hand you the mic.
So how does it work? Okay. No, I was. Thank you very much. Really, I appreciate a lot of what you said, especially maybe not so much to discuss. It would be like great for a different kind of conversation about people, right? In the business we do, and the positions, and maybe how we need them to not only to do business but to be inspired and in general maintain the sane mind, right? It's not only it's not always for business, yeah. But I really It's something interesting what you said about the perspective of the large companies that bring new technologies, right? It's so interesting for me because this is something that I try to do from the other perspective. Yes, so I take usually a very small startup that is already selling the technology, but I take them overseas and try to introduce them, but not directly to these large companies, but also through partners. So I already tend to have some relationship there, some trust. And for example, now I have a very small company of like 15 people with financial technology, and a partner is taking us to three, I mean, starting with one, but top US banks, right? So I was wondering, maybe you could elaborate, I mean, give us a little more information of how you see it as a what is really needed from the perspective of this small startup to have a success with this kind of really incredibly large organizations, right? Because as you said, it has to be something really special, right? It cannot
Yeah.
be like incremental, small part that we solve, right? Because this is also a very large um, risk on their side, right?
Yes.
Really large investments.
Yeah, I think every company is different. So I think it really depends on how that company approaches innovation, how they think about integrating it either directly within the operational teams or through an innovation team. But I think some of the things to consider, one, especially when you're crossing borders, making sure you sell in the way the buyer is used to. I think that was something I saw very strongly for a lot of the international companies or European companies I see trying to enter the U.S. market, not knowing the U.S. way of communicating. There's a book called Culture Map, which I recommend to everyone. It sort of maps out how different cultures get persuaded, and I think it's critical. In France and US are opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of persuasion styles. In the US, if something delivers results, we're good. In France, you need to understand the theory behind it. And so if you're a small French startup and you go to the Gap and you try and convince based on theory, no one's going to buy what you have. And so I think first it's really understanding who you're talking to, how they make their decisions. I think you have to also be very aware of the sort of disruption that's going to happen in change management. And there's a article that I love called "Giving Away Your Legos: Rules for Scaling." And it's about how when you're in a scale up, you always have to, you're a bit like a toddler, right? You have your pile of Legos and you work hard on it and you build something beautiful and you love it. But eventually you have to give that pile of Legos away and move on to the bigger pile of Legos. But because you've built such a pretty tower, you don't want to. And I think that's very much the way a lot of large businesses are today. You have AI coming in that has the ability to, remove a lot of jobs. So is the person who brings that technology in scared of losing their own job, or do they see it that they could maybe give the boring parts of their role to AI and start doing the more strategic, deeper thinking things? And I think there's a huge element of that as well. And then just size, a small startup is used to moving really incredibly fast. There is no large corporate I know of, at least, that can move super fast. So being thoughtful about that, making sure you pace things according to whoever you're selling into.
Right. Right. And I think that it's amazing because when we touch on this part, especially, we have so many people here which are from the partnerships branch of industry, right? So many people who are really specialized in doing these connections, right, or being the interface for this kind of stuff, right, Carlos?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that role, back to you, Olivia, in terms of fractional roles, and I think that very the head of partnerships, the head of, or the partnership director, or I don't know, ecosystem, whatever, if you like, it's a role that I've been noticing a growth, especially in the US. There are communities like Pavilion or partnership leaders, and I mean, Leonora here, she's part of CX, Women in CX, and I think partnerships is a role that is just going to become more important. And I believe that I'm a big believer in ecosystems. So getting people, creating unobvious connections, they will lead you to obvious results, right? Because people talk to each other, but they need to feel that they are in a place that they feel perhaps protected, or that it's interesting, so they can help each other out. So definitely, I'm a big believer in partnerships. And actually, I wanted to ask you this, Olivia. What's your views on partnerships? What's your views on the role of communities today?
Yeah. Oh, I think it's critical. I think what you said, you can do so much more when everyone's in it together. And when everyone's participating versus a one-sided relationship. And I think communities really are that. If everyone has a role to play, a stake in the success, as well as some potential benefit, it's, things are going to go so much faster and go so much further. So I totally agree with you. And I think on the partnership side, it's absolutely, it's critical for growth. There are very few businesses that can do it without partnerships, and the right kind of partnership can accelerate things beyond what other channels could.
Mhm. We have Hawan joining us from the US. Hawan is a great guy. Go ahead, Hawan.
Hey Olivia, thank you for sharing your experience. It's been a really great session. Um, I make some notes. You talk about really interesting themes, and I really like it when you said that you prefer to know more things in different areas than be specialized in one. It's something that's like the T shape from that Stanford talks a lot. So I really like to be that kind of person. So I really like what you said. And you talk about some differences between US and Europe. What I would like to ask is, but what do you feel like it's common for both, not both countries, both regions? We are all humans. So what do you see that are the common things between US, which is really really fast culture, and Europe that it's more maybe not so fast, more relaxed culture?
Yeah, or even more thoughtful in some ways. Yeah, look, I mean, I actually think the majority is very similar, and it's really just the edges that are different. At the end of the day, we're all humans. We eat, we drink, we enjoy family and friends. I do think you know, for me, it was very different when I moved here, learning how to motivate team members in a different way. In the US, it's probably a little bit more about how, the money you can make, the career path you go on. I would say it's a little bit less of that here. But at the end of the day, what you see is everyone wants to do well. They want to be part of a team. They want to feel good about what they're doing every single day. And that seems pretty universal.
Yeah, nice, nice. And also, you found really interesting you talking about the risk aversion, and here in US is really common to try to do, and it's okay if you fail. And how do you see that in Europe? Do you believe they are more disruptive or less disruptive because of the risk?
Yeah, it's super interesting, and I can speak about France because I live here now to a certain extent. I spent some time in the UK. I think every country is probably quite different, but one thing that stood out to me in France is that there are pretty strict bankruptcy laws here. So again, in the US, if you try something, you fail and you go bankrupt, you can go try again. In France, if you try something, you go bankrupt and you fail, you actually can't start another business, I think, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but it's something like 5 years. So I think there are a lot of structural elements that reduce propensity to take risk. And I think what's hard is one of the things I would kind of joke about, especially when I was focused on investing, is, I think successful founders often have a little bit of crazy, and there's the right side, and then there's the wrong side. Then there's like the WeWorks of the world, right? And so I think you have to have that ability to be a little bit out there, maybe take risks. And I think when you have a very strong structural or regulatory framework that holds you back, potentially you won't go as far as you could otherwise.
And the last one, as an investor in what is the most disruptive idea that you found recently?
Yeah, I think whether it's the most disruptive, I'm not sure. What I'm most excited about right now is composable AI. So really allowing brands and retailers to bring AI into their tech stack, but in a way that anyone can use. I think so far AI has been a little bit black box. You know what the outputs are, but you don't necessarily know what happens inside. And I was looking at a couple of companies recently where you actually can compare different models. So you can see what your search results look like with this model versus that model, or AI agents with this model versus that model. And I think that's really empowering and has potential to turn e-com folks in particular into AI experts, which is super cool.
Nice. Thank you very much.
Gustavo, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, well, I'd like to extend a comment about what you talk with Hawan, and in this point of having people that know more than one specific. Well, when you know more than only one specific subject, when you're not specialized only in one thing. I had a talk few time. Couple while ago with a with a with a with a hiring person, and this is in hiring. She has a hiring company, and was talking about exactly that in the way that the market is changing nowadays, and they were having a really tough conversation with companies, especially in Europe, because they are very focused in super specialized people, and they were talking, okay, but the some other regions and some other professionals, they have uh, different talent. They are not so specialized, but the way the market is changing nowadays, if you have only super specialized people, you don't know what's coming up next in the market, and you only have super specialized people in that area, and it will be very much harder for you to change if you need to pivot anything in your company. So I'd like to extend a bit about that, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, definitely. I see that. I think there's always that combination that you need to have of specialists and generalists. And I think one of the things that I've always said, is I'm good enough at a lot of things, but I also know when someone can be way better than me. So I'm pretty good at getting things from 0 to 10, let's say, and then hiring in a specialist who can go way beyond where I could go myself. And I think you do need that combination, because as a generalist, I'm gonna have a very different point of view than someone who's a specialist and is like, this is the best way to do it. And so I think without that sort of back and forth, you're right, you can get very far. You can, I think ultimately you become a very siloed, old-fashioned business. But I think if you have only generalists, you're going to reinvent the wheel when you don't need to. And I've seen that with some of the startups I worked at, where you had a bunch of really, smart generalists who had never specialized in anything, who would, rethink how you do payroll. And sometimes you're like, no, payroll can just be payroll. Or, closing the books at the end of the month can just be closed. You don't have to reinvent everything.
Yeah, great. Yeah, totally agree.
Olivia, could you comment? So you mentioned your views on composable AI. So some of the companies you were investing in, what was it that they were doing at right now? And I'm also interested in asking or hearing from you um, something that you thought it would work and it was a I won't call it a terrible investment, but something that
Yeah.
failed miserably. Like.
Yeah. So one of the things I actually struggled with as an investor is the feedback loops are incredibly long. So I'm not going to know if the investments I made are any good for, 3 or 4 years. So I don't have any that have gone out of business or failed at this point. I'm sure there will be, because I think given the power rule of investing, like 80% should fail. So I don't have failures yet, though I expect they will come. Um, Probably, I think the bias I definitely had was getting really excited about things that I personally was interested in. And I'll give one, like reusable packaging for e-commerce. I
Mhm.
think one of the things that every time I ran an e-commerce business and you thought about the cost, but the environmental impact of shipping all those boxes. And so I spent probably hours more than I should have looking at solutions for that, because the reality is, until I don't, there are no solutions out there that I think solve the problem. Um, but because I have such a personal interest in it, I spent probably a lot more time with a lot of these companies than I should have.
So reusable packaging. What was that?
Yeah, reusable packaging, or just anything that can disrupt, whether it's reusable packaging, alternative materials. I think there's a
Mhm.
huge breadth of things. But reusable packaging, you talk to some companies and they say the packaging, you can reuse this e-commerce box 100 times. The reality is, if a customer doesn't put it in the mail back to you and you have that return shipping and return logistics, it's never going to get reused. So yes, potentially it could, like it will handle going through the postal system that many
Mhm.
times, but actually it's just going to be probably a one time use. And so
Mhm.
there are a lot of companies like that. There are a lot of companies doing alternative materials that are super interesting. Using seaweed to replace plastics. I love that. But they don't all have the same quality levels as plastic. Like
Mhm.
plastic is waterproof. It is virtually indestructible, which is what's so terrible in the environment, but what actually makes it a really useful product when you're shipping products across the world.
Yeah, I think there's some of the technologies or startups or companies that they make up for really nice headlines, but when you when you
Yeah,
have to scale them and try them, I mean, it simply
yeah,
doesn't
it,
work. Plastic is
it,
a technology, and it still works, even though
yeah.
uh, we have
It
a lot
works
of issues.
until you take end of life into consideration, and then it's a
Exactly.
complete failure. Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. So I think that was definitely my bias. Is I spent a lot of time looking at the technologies that I I was excited about. That I'm not sure any of those will. At some point, someone will crack it, but
Mhm.
I think it's going to take some more innovation.
Cool. Olivia, as an investor,
Yeah,
and now you're doing your own thing.
yeah,
What is it that you're looking at the moment? If you're looking for investments, you look for a technology. You look for, of course, the problem that the company is solving. Technology, the team. Can you comment a bit on your moment? What is it that you're looking at the moment as an investor, as an advisor?
yeah,
Because I think retail, as we're speaking, it's such a massive ecosystem. You have returns, you have personalization, you have platforms, you have a world, right?
yeah. I think there are two. I think it's the two things I really look at are people who understand the problem intimately. And I
Mhm.
think you get a lot of folks who can look at a problem in a very intellectual way that, you know, when you've run inventory planning, I'll give an example. There's a company called Otan out of the UK, and the founders of it came from Alexander McQueen, I believe, and they were planning managers at Alexander McQueen. And they saw how broken the planning system was. So every season they had to plan. They couldn't get the right information in. They couldn't, they were doing what every single one of us who has been a planner at some point has done, which is use Excel and like then maybe input it into a system. And so for me, what was so special about these guys is they knew the problem firsthand and they had felt the pain for years, and they built the technology to solve that. And so for me, that combination of intimate knowledge and firsthand experience. And then I think the second big piece is just the tenacity. Is this someone who has a drive to succeed and win, and will kind of do it at all costs? It's not easy to do a startup. So
Yeah, for sure. But how do you help startups nowadays? Is it opening your network as well once you invest in? Is
yeah,
it
opening my network, helping with go-to-market strategy, helping with fundraising, pretty broad. Helping with operations, product ideas. So I always think of myself as more of a thought partner. Like I can dive in, I can go help with something really in particular, or I can just be there to respond to a CEO or a founder's questions when they come up against a problem and they don't know which way to go.
When you look at your portfolio and again looking at community now, do you see these companies, collaborating with each other also? So
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I did at Dastor was do subject matter webinars, so that all the sales folks of the portfolio companies would get together and we could talk about best practices. All the marketing folks, we could talk about, content marketing, and through that build the network. And I think as well, when you're investing in retail tech, essentially most of your portfolio companies are going to have similar target ICPs. And so if you can start lead sharing, but do it in a way where it's beneficial for both people, you can start accelerating companies much faster.
100%. All right. Ladies and gents, any more questions for Olivia? Diego, you're here. I'm not sure if you're available. Ben, yeah, he's on mute. If you guys have questions, different perspectives.
Well, I'd like to get back in one question, but
Yes, please.
I think Olivia had left open, which was which company you invested in or you have saw that you believe that was okay. I believe this will go through, but it went. It was the e-commerce packaging that you were talking about. Because I understood that this was an area that you would like to see more development in the side, that you would like to engage more in this area. But did you had any company that you were okay? I believe this will go. This will be good, but at the end it didn't run. I don't. I don't speak about in terms of investment, but the way the companies run, what was running, and you said, okay, maybe now they're going a little tangent. We don't need to be specific, but in general.
Yeah. So from the investment perspective, I don't have those results yet, but I mean, I think Blue Apron's an interesting example where we were a huge unicorn. We grew from, I was employee number 35. We were a few thousand when I left. We got to IPO within about 4 years, grew to about 890 million in revenue, I believe. And the huge issue here, and I think this was an example of we had potentially a few too many generalists, especially supply chain and warehouse automation was one area that, there's some best practices there, and we could have just used those best practices rather than innovating. But I think one of the big challenges is the private markets valued us as a tech company with a multiple times revenue multiple. And the public markets valued us as grocery, which trades at, I think less than 1x revenue. It's usually a multiple of EBITDA, which is almost nothing in grocery. And so within our lockup period after we IPO'd, we lost 65% of our value. And I think that was, it was a great experience, but we all learned so much from it. I think not even our original investors were prepared for what the public market did to us.
Great, thank you.
Very cool. So that was Olivia, Mark. If you guys have questions, please feel free. We still have a few minutes. Otherwise, I mean, this was a really interesting, different session, more interaction. I love it when we have our members jumping in. Hawan, Sabrina, you guys have questions?
Yeah, I have one. Um, it's about your answer where you said that the AI is like a black box, and I totally agree with that. It's for me, it's sometimes it's kind of metaverse where everyone is talking about. When you ask what is the most disruptive thing you've seen, it's metaverse, and a couple months later, you don't talk more about that. So I totally agree because AI is okay. It's the thing of the moment, but we have to have a result. We have to have concrete results. Yeah. So you talk about the composable AI and how you are seeing that. So if you could talk a little bit more about that, I found really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're totally right. Everyone's talking about it. Very few people are doing it, or fewer people are. I think there is a big fear as well of what, if you implement something wrong, what's it going to do, especially when you're a consumer facing business. The advice I always give is find the thing you hate doing the most and find the AI solution for that, and then start expanding from there. Because I think everyone has that one part of their job that they hate doing, and there is an AI tool that can help you solve that. So start there, and then I think once you do your first AI implementation, everything else gets easier and better. But yeah, the way a lot of these things are built, you still need human in the loop, which makes sense. You still need to have that feedback between the product. I think when you think about the application layer, and that's really where I think about for the most part of retail technologies that people are going to implement, you need to make sure that you understand what models people are using, what the latency is going to be, what sort of what the actual impact is going to be, and how much you as the end user is going to be able to influence things. And I think those are pieces that are going to become easier over time as you have more and more competitors in these different categories.
Thank you.
If I can add to this, because I'm working a lot with AI companies, and I can observe this trend towards going out of the black box, right? So, for example, there are many companies that at the moment can have the AI as a black box, and even the process is the black box. Yes, so they just connect and get the service. Yes, and they tend to first understand what's inside.
Yeah.
Then maybe try to adjust it to the real needs, because if there is a black box, it's probably for everyone the same.
Yeah.
Then take a little more control of this, having it, for example, inside where they can play with it, they can add their own models that they can understand. Maybe they can have something like a solution which is separate from the model, and the model they can play with some other models, right? So
sure.
I can really observe it. But yes, I would, for example, I would love to have an AI just for myself that would understand me.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't exchange my data with anyone. Yeah, that would be like something amazing.
For sure. No, totally. Yeah, I think some of the companies like in this space, Gen AI out of the US is pretty interesting. I'm trying to think. There's the other one, Composer. I'm blanking on the name, but more for multi-brand retailers. So I think there's some really interesting things happening. I think there's also the problem of a bunch of startups just putting the word AI in their name and hoping that's enough. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. If you're not solving problems, it doesn't matter how much AI you think you're using.
Yeah, that's right. On the investment side of things, there was a strong contraction, right? Like investors, they are not, let's say, as positive. I mean, you need to prove yourself nowadays, which is good, I think, right? Because during the pandemic, it was just like money craze and take
Yeah.
money, whatever.
Money being thrown at everything. Totally. Gustavo, I totally see your point about AI versus automation. I totally agree. A lot of it is workflow automation, and that's great. And it does some stuff, but it doesn't do everything.
Mhm.
Guys, one more, and it's probably not just for Olivia, but for all of us, a question like more general, right? There is a lot of new technology coming in, especially in the AI, but also in other technology. We also like to say disruptive technology, etc. But the thing is that over years and decades, each time that there is a new technology and we think that it can be disruptive, it tends to create more monopolies. What do you think about this state of technology and the AI? Perhaps in retail, perhaps more in general, will it create like more monopolies, even though we have so many startups, or does it have the potential to create like new players, right? Or maybe democratize? I know it's maybe not directly related, but I'm very happy to hear about from you.
Happy to share my point on this, whether it's right or not. I think you will get some new players, and you've already seen it with OpenAI. I think it's going to be hard at the really small level, the really small startups working in AI. Ultimately, the large companies can implement AI and they have a distribution advantage. And I think that is so critical. You see what Microsoft has been able to do with AI in the last 6 months. There are so many companies that could have taken that role, but because of Microsoft's distribution advantage, they were able to accelerate so much. And so I think that, yes, you are going to get small startups that are challenging the big guys, but that at the end of the day, you still have a lot of the big guys winning.
Yeah.
But that's just my point.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have an opinion. I mean, I like the perspective of the distribution, and I completely agree. I don't know with blockchain if you can call it, if you can create potentially some side movements or more like anarchistic. How I would say that in English? Olivia, help me here.
Yeah, and our
anarch movements, where you would have a decentralization. So I think that's one aspect of companies that would rebel, I think. But I don't know. I think distribution is so important when you look at CPG, when you look at technology ecosystems, as we were speaking about. So you may create something cool, but eventually I think everyone has a price, and it's very very hard to say no to $1 billion if Microsoft or Facebook says, and even though they're not going to use your technology, right? So I think companies may create stuff, and unless the founder is definitely not driven by money, and has become maybe Peter Thiel, who's already reached something, and can create a different world, then maybe I think we can have other companies that are going to be more, I don't know, part of like a side movement. But I think distribution is, as Olivia said, it's really critical, really. So Very cool. We just reached an hour here, 1 hour. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Olivia, thank you so much for your time. Would love to know what you thought of this session. It's your
Thanks for
first time
having me.
here.
Yeah,
No, of
thanks
course.
for having me. It was fantastic. Yeah, really excited to chat with everyone and share ideas.
Amazing. So what I'm gonna ask people to our members to do is to hit you up on LinkedIn or also on WhatsApp where we are all connected, and that's the goal. I mean that's what we do. We've been doing this for actually more than 20 weeks, but this is expert session number 20 because we also have our one-to-one sessions and other events. But that's it, guys. So do connect with Olivia. If Olivia, you can always tell them what you're looking for in terms of investment. Maybe they know some people. Maybe they also want to they want investment, so you guys can talk in private. And that was it. All right.
Fantastic. Great meeting everyone and looking forward to connecting.
Cool. Thanks,
Thank you
guys.
very much. A great session.
Have a great one. Yeah. Ciao.
Great.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Olivia, we'll have
Bye.
a chat in 30 seconds.